really was Willie Maxwell, better known to the world as Fetty Wap, the chart-topping rapper who once made everyone sing along to Trap Queen? How did a man who seemed to have it all, fame, money, fans, and opportunity, end up trading the bright lights of the music industry for the darkness of the drug trade? Was this the story of a star who couldn't escape the street life he once rapped about, or was there something deeper at play? Bad influences, desperate choices, or a hunger for more than fame could ever provide? Why would someone with platinum records and sold-out shows risk it all by stepping into a conspiracy to distribute heroin, fentanyl, and other deadly drugs, poisons that were destroying communities across America? Was it greed, loyalty to old friends, or a belief that he could live a double life without consequences? And when the federal hammer finally came down in 2023, sentencing him to 6 years behind bars, what did that moment mean for his family, his fans, and for Fetty himself? Was this the tragic downfall of a hip-hop star who flew too high, too fast? Or was it simply another reminder that fame doesn't erase the temptations of the street, and that even those who reach the top can be pulled back down by the weight of their choices? The real question: how did Fetty Wap's story shift from being a soundtrack of success to a cautionary tale of crime, consequence, and wasted potential? Keep watching, because the truth behind Fetty Wap's double life is darker than anyone imagined. On a quiet day in 2023, inside a federal courtroom, the world watched as Willie Jr. Maxwell II, known to millions as Fetty Wap, stood before a judge. The man who once topped charts, filled stadiums, and gave us one of the most unforgettable hooks of the 2010s was about to hear his fate. The gavel dropped. 6 years in federal prison. The rap star, now reduced to inmate number BB 567. How did a chart-topping rap star, a man who turned a personal anthem into a global phenomenon, end up here? Was it greed, betrayal, or something darker, hidden deep within the music industry's shadows? This wasn't just another fall from grace. This was a descent into a world where fame collides with street loyalty, where fortune is never enough, and where choices echo louder than applause. But to understand how Fetty Wap got here, you have to rewind. Way back. Before the cars, before the jewelry, before the #1 records. You have to go to the streets of Paterson, New Jersey, a place defined by struggle, survival, and silence. A city that gave him his voice, and eventually, the demons that would haunt him. Because long before the music industry embraced him, Fetty was fighting battles few ever saw. And here's the truth most fans never knew. Willie Maxwell lived a double life. On one side, he was the dreamer, the kid chasing beats, rhymes, and a chance at greatness. On the other, he was tied to the streets, to people, to moves, to whispers of hustles that never quite disappeared. Fame doesn't erase your past. Sometimes it magnifies it. By the time Fetty Wap was climbing Billboard charts, federal agents were already climbing case files. A conspiracy was unfolding beneath the music. Heroin, fentanyl, cocaine. Interstate networks stretching from coast to coast. And in the middle of it all, the superstar no one expected. The rise was meteoric. The crash? Unimaginable. But what if I told you the seeds of his downfall were planted long before his arrest, hidden in plain sight? The lyrics, the lifestyle, the choices, it all built toward this moment. A moment where applause faded into silence, and success turned into shackles. Because this story isn't just about a crime. It's about contradictions. A superstar and a street hustler. A man loved for his voice, yet condemned for his choices. It's about what happens when the American dream becomes the American downfall. And the question that lingers isn't just how it happened, but why. So how did Willie Maxwell, the voice behind Trap Queen, the man who turned a hustler's story into a global anthem, become inmate number ID? Was it fate, poor choices, or a system waiting for him to slip? Tonight, we're unraveling it all. The rise, the empire, the betrayal, the case, and the fall. This is the life and crime of Fetty Wap, and to understand the man, we must go all the way back. Willie Maxwell before Fetty Wap. Paterson, New Jersey. A city with history in its bricks, grit in its air, and survival etched into every street corner. To outsiders, it might look like just another on the map. Working-class neighborhoods, old factories, blocks that tell the story of a once bustling city. But for those who live here, Paterson is something else entirely. It's a test, and only the strongest make it through. In this place, on June 7, 1991, Willie Jr. Maxwell II was born. The boy who would one day call himself Fetty Wap entered life with obstacles already waiting for him. As a child, he battled congenital glaucoma, an illness that clouded his vision and led doctors to remove his left eye. For most kids, childhood is a time of play and innocence. For Willie, it was a battlefield of surgeries, stares, and survival. Imagine being a child who looks different. Every room you walk into, every hallway at school, there are whispers, stares, questions. Willie carried that weight everywhere he went. But instead of breaking him, it built him. He learned toughness. He learned to fight back not with fists, though there were plenty of fights, but with resilience. That eye became part of his story, part of his identity, and in time, part of his legend. Growing up in Paterson meant growing up surrounded by choices most kids should never have to face. Drugs, gangs, hustlers, broken systems. This wasn't just the background. It was the reality. Willie grew up watching the streets take boys his age and turn them into soldiers, dealers, and, too often, ghosts. And he knew if he wasn't careful, he could be next. But inside that chaos, Willie discovered something powerful: music. It wasn't just entertainment, it was escape. While others picked up work on the corners, he picked up a pen. While others hustled for a quick dollar, he hustled for a voice. And it was in those quiet moments, scribbling bars in the back of a notebook, that a new path began to form. One that might just carry him out of Paterson. By his teenage years, Willie was chasing sound, recording rough demos, freestyling in basements, testing his voice against beats downloaded off the internet. Every rapper has that moment, the one where they realize this isn't just a hobby, it's a way out. For Willie, that moment came fast. He wasn't just good. He was different. He had hunger in his voice, pain in his delivery, and a vision that could not be ignored. But dreams are fragile things, especially in a place like Paterson. For everyone that makes it out, 100 get crushed. The streets don't let go easy. They don't care if you're writing rhymes or running plays. The trap has many doors, and most of them don't lead out. Even as Willie dreamed of stages and spotlights, the world around him was pulling at his ankles, threatening to drag him back down. What kept him going? The same thing that would one day make him a star: resilience. Willie had already survived stares, surgeries, and a city that swallowed kids whole. If life thought it could break him, it had already failed. He wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. And soon, that persistence was about to collide with opportunity. Because while the world knew him as Fetty Wap, the hitmaker, the chart topper, the superstar, before all that, he was just Willie. A kid with one eye, one dream, and one shot at something bigger. The question wasn't if he had the talent. The question was if he could survive long enough to let the world hear it. And when that voice finally broke out, it didn't just change Willie's life. It changed music. But success is never free. And for Willie Maxwell, the price of fame was already waiting in the shadows. The rise of Fetty Wap. Every story of fame has a spark. For Willie Maxwell, that spark was just 4 words. 1738, Remy Boys. A chant, a call, a signature. But no one, not even Willie, knew that behind those words was a storm about to break the music world wide open. It started simple: a beat, a notebook full of rhymes, and a voice that didn't sound like anyone else. Willie wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing truth, raw, unpolished, real. That truth would become a song called Trap Queen. A love story mixed with hustling, survival, and loyalty. It wasn't polished radio pop. It was gritty. It was honest. And that honesty, it hit people where they lived. Trap Queen wasn't supposed to be a hit. It was a track dropped on SoundCloud, just another song among millions. But the internet has a way of finding diamonds in the dirt. The play count started climbing. 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. Each click was fuel. Each share, another spark. And soon, Willie Maxwell was no longer just a kid from Paterson. He was Fetty Wap, the voice behind a song the world couldn't stop playing. By 2014, the wave was undeniable. From house parties to nightclubs, from Jersey blocks to LA streets, everyone was singing. I'm like, hey, what's up, hello. It wasn't just a song. It was an anthem. And Fetty Wap? He wasn't just making music anymore. He was making history. Trap Queen peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. Number 2. Out of every song in America, only one was bigger. That doesn't happen to rookies. That doesn't happen by accident. It was Fetty's moment, and he wasn't about to waste it. On stage, Fetty was different. That voice, raspy, melodic, addictive, wasn't like anyone else. He wasn't just rapping. He wasn't just singing. He was somewhere in between, a style that critics couldn't define but fans couldn't resist. Fetty's eye, once a childhood scar, now made him instantly recognizable. It wasn't a weakness anymore. It was an emblem. With fame came money, cars, jewelry, interviews, features. He went from Paterson's blocks to private jets almost overnight. But no matter how high he climbed, Fetty never cut ties with where he came from. He was loyal to his friends, to his crew, to the streets that raised him. And loyalty can be dangerous. 2015 wasn't just Fetty's year. It was something rap hadn't seen in decades. 4 singles in the Billboard Top 10 at the same time. That feat hadn't been done since the Beatles. Think about that. A kid from Paterson, New Jersey, standing shoulder to shoulder with one of the greatest bands in history. Fetty Wap wasn't just winning. He was rewriting the game. But with every rise comes a shadow. Success doesn't erase the past. It magnifies it. The fame was real. The money was real. But so were the whispers. So were the calls. So were the connections that never fully disappeared. And as Fetty reached the height of his career, something else was waiting, something that had nothing to do with music. Because while the world saw Fetty Wap the superstar, federal agents were seeing something else. They weren't looking at the charts. They were looking at the streets. They weren't tracking singles. They were tracking shipments. And sooner or later, those two worlds were going to collide. The double life. Success is a spotlight. It makes the glamorous brighter, but it also makes the shadows darker. For Fetty Wap, the world saw the superstar, the hits, the awards, the screaming crowds. But behind the curtain, away from the lights, another life was still unfolding. A life tied to loyalty. A life tied to survival. A life tied to the streets. To understand the double life, you have to return to Paterson. Fetty's hometown wasn't just his origin story, it was his anchor. Friends, family, crew, the people who were there before fame, who knew him as Willie, not Fetty. And in Paterson, music wasn't the only currency. There was another economy. One made of secrecy, addiction, and power. An economy where loyalty mattered more than money, and betrayal could cost your life. While Fetty was building hits in the studio, his circle was building something else: networks. Distribution lines. Deals whispered in the shadows. To some, Fetty was just the superstar face. To others, he was a lifeline, a symbol of success they could tie themselves to. But fame doesn't erase old bonds. And in Fetty's case, those bonds were pulling him into a world most fans never saw. Federal investigators would later allege that Fetty wasn't just an observer. That he, along with several associates, became part of a massive operation moving heroin, fentanyl, and other drugs into New York and New Jersey. These weren't small-time hustles. These were multi-million-dollar pipelines feeding an epidemic. The kind of operation that doesn't just make headlines, it makes federal cases. The timing couldn't have been worse. America was in the grip of an opioid crisis, with fentanyl leading the body count. Every overdose, every life lost, added fuel to the government's war against traffickers. And into that storm stepped Fetty Wap, a man adored by millions, now allegedly tied to the very poison destroying communities. To the fans, nothing seemed wrong. Fetty was still performing, still smiling, still living the dream. But to the feds? The dream was an illusion. Behind the beats and the hits, they believed a conspiracy was unfolding. One that stretched from Paterson to Long Island. One that tied rap stardom to the darkest corners of the drug trade. And the question wasn't if the truth would catch up, it was when. Because time was running out. Every package moved. Every text sent. Every dollar counted. Each moment brought Willie Maxwell closer to the day when both his worlds, Fetty the superstar and Willie from Paterson, would collide in a way that neither could survive. And somewhere, deep in federal offices, agents were already watching, listening, building a case, step by step, call by call, move by move. A case that would one day land Fetty Wap in a courtroom, facing charges no chart position could protect him from. But how do you catch a superstar? How do you turn applause into evidence? And how did a kid with a dream, who once gave the world nothing but music, become a target in one of the nation's biggest drug conspiracies? To answer that, we have to follow the investigation. The investigation and the fall. Every empire leaves footprints. No matter how carefully you hide, no matter how loud the music plays, the echoes of your choices leave trails. And in 2019, while Fetty Wap was still performing on stages, those echoes were already being traced by men and women who didn't care about Billboard charts or viral hits or sold-out shows. They cared about one thing: evidence. Wiretaps, surveillance vans, confidential informants. These were the tools of the investigation. Federal agents, working alongside local police, began to peel back the layers of a network they believed was flooding New York and New Jersey with fentanyl and heroin. Each call intercepted was a puzzle piece. Each movement tracked was another thread woven into a web that was slowly tightening around Willie Maxwell and his associates. The network stretched further than many realized. From Paterson streets to stash houses in Long Island, shipments flowed like a hidden river.
Heroin,
Fentanyl,
cocaine, pills.
The streets called it hustle. The law called it conspiracy. And every package that moved was being watched more closely than anyone on the inside could imagine. Meanwhile, fentanyl overdoses were climbing. Families shattered. Communities torn apart. Each headline made the case more urgent. To the DEA and FBI, this wasn't just another crew. This was fuel feeding a national crisis. And if a celebrity's name was tied to it, that only made the mission more critical. Raids began. Quietly at first. A stash house here, a supplier there. Agents seized cash, weapons, drugs, more puzzle pieces fitting into place. But the feds weren't after just the small players. They were watching the bigger picture. They were waiting for the moment when the man in the spotlight would walk straight into their case file. And here's the paradox of celebrity. The brighter you shine, the easier you are to find. While Fetty Wap traveled city to city, the investigation traveled with him. His fame wasn't a shield, it was a spotlight. Every move documented. Every flight logged. Every performance another breadcrumb on a trail that was about to end in handcuffs. In October 2021, the illusion shattered. Federal prosecutors unsealed an indictment charging Fetty Wap and 5 co-defendants with conspiring to distribute over 100 kilograms of heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine. It was no longer whispers. No longer speculation. It was official. A superstar was now a suspect. The timing was cinematic. Hours before he was scheduled to perform at the Rolling Loud Festival in New York, Fetty Wap was arrested by federal agents. One moment, a superstar about to take the stage. The next, a defendant in handcuffs. The crowd didn't know it yet, but for Fetty, the show was already over. The news spread like wildfire. Fans stunned. Headlines brutal. How could the man who gave the world trap queen now be accused of pushing poison? The shock wasn't just national, it was global. The superstar image was cracked. And through that crack, the darker story poured out. But an arrest is not the end. It's the beginning of a new battle. For Fetty Wap, the stage was gone. The audience was now a jury. And the script was no longer his to write. It belonged to the courts, the prosecutors, and the federal system determined to make an example out of him. But how do you defend the undefendable? Could a superstar beat a federal case stacked with wiretaps, raids, and seized evidence? Or was this the moment when Willie Maxwell's two lives finally collapsed into one? To find out, we have to step into the courtroom. The courtroom battle. The streets gave him fame. The stage gave him power. But now, none of that mattered. In 2021, Willie Maxwell, known to the world as Fetty Wap, walked into a federal courthouse not as a superstar, but as a defendant. And in this building, there were no screaming fans, no flashing lights. Only the cold machinery of justice, waiting to decide his fate. The indictment was heavy. Conspiracy to distribute heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine. The prosecutors painted a picture of a man living two lives, rap star by day, conspirator by night. They spoke of shipments, wiretaps, seized packages. To the jury, they offered more than just words. They offered evidence, cold, undeniable, and damning. Agents played tapes. They showed transcripts of coded conversations. They revealed surveillance photos, mapping out the alleged conspiracy. This wasn't a case built on rumors. It was built on months, even years, of patient observation. And every piece of evidence brought Fetty Wap closer to a reality no artist wants, a federal conviction. But defense attorneys fought back. They argued that Fetty wasn't the mastermind, that he was a target because of his fame, that others in his circle dragged his name into deals he never controlled. They painted him not as a kingpin, but as a man trapped between loyalty to his friends and the image the government wanted to sell. To them, Fetty wasn't a criminal, he was a scapegoat. The truth lay somewhere between those walls. On one side, prosecutors with files stacked high, evidence cataloged down to the gram. On the other, a man who once ruled the charts, now stripped of music and fame, reduced to nothing more than a case number. The battle was fierce, but in federal court, the odds are rarely even. Because in federal cases, the conviction rate is staggering, over 90%. Few walk away free. Most never walk away at all. And Fetty Wap, sitting in silence, knew that every minute in that courtroom brought him closer to a crossroads. Fight a case he couldn't win, or plead guilty and hope for mercy. In August 2022, Fetty Wap made his choice. He stood before the judge and admitted guilt to one count of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The superstar, who once commanded arenas, now uttered the words no fan ever expected to hear, guilty. And with that single plea, the battle in the courtroom ended. But the war for his freedom was only just beginning. Because a guilty plea is not the end. It is the beginning of judgment. And judgment in federal court is merciless. The next chapter of Fetty Wap's story would not be written by him, or his fans, or his music. It would be written by a federal judge, holding the power to decide just how many years Willie Maxwell would disappear behind bars. The sentencing. May 24, 2023. The day had come. Willie Maxwell, Fetty Wap, was no longer fighting. He was waiting. Waiting for a federal judge to decide how much of his life would be spent behind bars. The superstar was now just another name on a crowded docket, one more defendant in a system built on judgment. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the click of shoes on polished floors, the slam of the gavel, echoed like a drumbeat of finality. Fetty Wap sat quietly, his hands clasped, his eyes fixed forward. The man who once commanded thousands with a microphone now sat in silence, waiting for a single voice to decide his fate. Prosecutors argued for severity. They described a man who, despite fame and fortune, chose the shadows of the drug trade. They spoke of kilos moved, communities harmed, lives destroyed by fentanyl and heroin. To them, Fetty Wap wasn't just an artist who made a mistake. He was proof that even the famous could fall prey to greed and crime. But the defense fought for mercy. They spoke of a boy from Paterson who lost an eye at birth, who clawed his way out of poverty, who gave the world music that inspired millions. They reminded the court that Fetty was a father, a son, a man who still had a chance to rebuild. They argued he wasn't a kingpin, but a loyal friend who got caught in currents bigger than himself. And then, silence. The kind of silence that makes time stretch. Every eye fixed on the bench. Every breath held. Because in this moment, one man's life balanced on the edge of a sentence that could either break him or spare him. The words fell like stone. 6 years in federal prison. 6 years stripped from the man who once stood at the top of the music world. 6 years for a conspiracy that prosecutors claimed helped flood the streets with poison. The courtroom didn't cheer. It didn't weep. It simply moved forward, as it always does. But for Willie Maxwell, time had stopped. Fetty nodded, almost as if he expected it. No outburst. No collapse. Just acceptance. For his family, the pain was harder to hide. Tears welled. Shoulders shook. Because no matter the crime, no matter the fame, in that moment, Fetty wasn't just a rapper or a defendant. He was Willie. A brother. A father. A son. And he was gone. But what does 6 years really mean? Is it punishment?
Redemption?
Or just the next chapter in a cycle that began long before Fetty ever picked up a microphone? To answer that, we have to step beyond the prison gates. Behind the razor wire and concrete walls, Willie Maxwell, Fetty Wap, began the hardest chapter of his life. Gone were the flashing lights, the roaring crowds, the stage built for a king. In their place, metal bars, a number on his back, and a clock that moved far too slow. Prison strips a man down to the bones of who he is. Every day is routine. Every sound, boots, keys, alarms, reminds you that freedom is no longer yours. For Fetty, this was more than punishment. It was reflection. Time to consider the path that took him from trap queen to inmate number 2660. He thought about the nights when his voice carried across arenas, when millions sang every word. He thought about the promises he made, the lives he touched, and the lives his choices may have hurt. Fame had given him the world, but choices had taken it away. And then there was family. Fetty was a father to 6 children. For them, he wasn't a star, he was dad. Prison meant distance, missed birthdays, missed hugs, missed time that no stage, no song, no amount of fame could ever bring back. Outside those prison walls, the world argued about him. To some, he was a fallen star who betrayed his gift. To others, he was a victim of circumstance, a man who rose too fast, surrounded by people who pulled him back into the trap he once tried to escape. His story became a warning, a mirror reflecting the dark side of fame. How do we measure a man's legacy? Is it in the hits he gave the world, the joy he brought millions of fans? Or is it in the mistakes that defined his downfall? For Willie Maxwell, the answer is complicated. He will always be remembered as Fetty Wap, the one-eyed rapper who turned pain into music. But his story will also forever carry the weight of choices that cost him his freedom. In the end, Fetty's rise and fall is more than just a headline. It is a human story of struggle, ambition, triumph, and tragedy. A story of how one man reached the top of the world, only to lose it all in a courtroom. And when the last note of Trap Queen fades, when the crowd stops singing, we are left with a single question. Was it worth it? Because for Fetty Wap, the stage is silent. The bars are closed. And the world will wait to see who walks out when the gates finally open. The story of Willie Maxwell, better known to the world as Fetty Wap, isn't just about a rap star who rose to fame and fell into crime. It is the story of a young man from Paterson, New Jersey, who overcame struggles, turned pain into music, and gave the world unforgettable hits. But it is also the story of choices, choices that led him from the stage lights to a prison cell. In 2023, Fetty Wap stood in a courtroom, no longer the superstar with millions of fans, but a defendant sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for drug conspiracy. His journey reminds us that success and freedom are fragile. Fame can vanish, money can fade, but one wrong step into crime can take everything away. The prison walls that now surround Fetty Wap are not just his reality, they are a warning. A warning that no matter who you are, no matter how high you rise, crime will always end the same way, with silence, regret, and time lost forever. So, if there's one lesson in Fetty Wap's story, it is this: protect your future, value your freedom, and never let the shadows of crime steal away the light you've worked so hard to build. Because in the end, prison doesn't just take away years, it takes away the chance to live the life you were meant to have. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If you found this journey as eye-opening and unforgettable as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We bring you more true crime stories, stories that shock, inspire, and remind us of the choices that shape our lives. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, the truth is always stranger than fiction.